Becoming magnetic, the psychology of charisma.
Ooh.
Just another form of irrational influence where it's not working on the level of logic. It's working again on this level of emotional resonance.
Celebrities develop a need for love and attention. They have to develop those skills to be charismatic.
The psychologist Daniel Goleman, who coined the term emotional intelligence, at one point in time also coined a term called resonant leadership.
The fact that you can actually learn to be charismatic is such a powerful thing.
An acoustic sound wave matches the frequency of an object. It can make the object vibrate.
Would you say that's like kind of the number one advice you would give somebody who would want to develop charisma?
He coined this phrase, attraction is not a choice. We were going to talk about some lessons from FBI hostage negotiators.
Ooh.
Nothing gets more intimate than a hostage negotiation. Like when you smile on a telephone, people can actually hear that you're smiling in your voice. The psychological recipe that he coined called being cocky funny.
Cocky funny.
Right. That's what he was able to boil it down to. So when someone smiles or laughs, observers often subconsciously mirror the facial expression. It's not yes. It's actually better to get people to say no.
Really?
People just say yes all the time. But if somebody says no, you now have something you actually work on.
Wow.
It's the life we play, in the games we spin. Where psychology meets marketing, we begin. You're part of the plan, it's a clever disguise. Manipulation games, we're opening your eyes.
You're listening to Manipulation Games Psychology and Marketing Podcast with your hosts, Gene and Darren.
Welcome to Manipulation Games Psychology and Marketing Podcast. I'm Darren with our marketing genius, Gene. How are you?
I'm really good, Darren. How
All right,
are you?
so I just want to ask you, what are we going to talk about today?
Today, we prepared for the audience Becoming Magnetic, the psychology of charisma.
Ooh, magnetic. I like that word. All right, let me ask you who this is for.
Who this is for?
Yeah.
So this is for someone who is confused by why some people are liked and some people are not. So for those who feel ignored, maybe not taken seriously, while seeing someone else who might be less qualified, less talented, or less worthy, but somehow socially magnetic, succeed in the arenas that you care about.
Wow.
Whether that's career and leadership, dating and relationships, sales, business, or wealth building.
I think that's all of us because we all know people like we look at them, how did this guy build this successful business or this empire?
Yeah.
And they're not the smartest guy typically, but they're very charismatic in a lot of ways. So that is, I'm sure all of us can relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always seen this. There's a certain tragedy sometimes where I see somebody who is deserving and talented and capable, but they're held back just because they're not able to see or interact with this hidden force of charisma, this like underlying layer of communication, what we could potentially call it's irrational influence.
Irrational influence.
Right.
Okay.
Like a lot of these things like we talk about, like the phenomenon of glamour, right? Glamour is a form of irrational influence.
Yeah.
And so charisma is just another form of irrational influence where it's not working on the level of logic. It's working again on this level of emotional resonance.
Right. That totally makes sense because it's not really logical. It's like, why do you like Leonardo DiCaprio? It's like, I don't know. He's just very charismatic. He's just kind of entertaining kind of guy. I like his acting, his ability to kind of like, just kind of, I don't know, just be really charismatic. I don't even know how to describe his acting other than just really charismatic on screen.
Well, I mean, that's sort of the aspect. People have a difficult time defining charisma. People know it when they see it. You know, back in the day, you know, the word charisma itself just meant like, being blessed, somebody who was just blessed with something. Oh. You know, someone who's given grace. But by the end of this conversation, I think once we kind of talk about the recipe of charisma, you will start being able to see it and be able to understand it and interact with it. Because
Okay.
once you know the recipe, once
Yeah.
you know like the little pieces of it, it actually becomes really clear. And there we have some like psychological research that actually kind of like looked into it and tried to tease it apart.
So let me just ask you a question. Why is it important to understand charisma?
Like again, there are people who are being held back because they're not able to like function on this like kind of hidden layer of communication that's happening.
Yeah.
And additionally, there are people who do get very good charismatic skills, right? And we've talked about this a number of times. Oftentimes, people who get very good at it might be doing so because they're driven by not noble reasons, right? Because there's some sort of pain they're trying to fill in their life, and then they get very good at getting people's love and attention.
Yeah, that's a good point because like, I think we discussed this a lot, but a lot of reasons why, for example, Hollywood celebrities, developed a need for the psychological hunger for for love and attention. They have to develop those skills to be charismatic, right? But again, this is just for the average viewer, listener here who doesn't have this crazy psychological hunger. But it's
Yeah.
important for us to learn it because that's really only the way we're going to be able to be charismatic, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't have that, all that trauma that caused us to want to be loved so much that we people who talk in the mirror a lot. I hear that about like actors, they talk for hours in the mirror just talking to themselves.
Yeah, they practice every little like micro
Practice.
expression.
Yes.
A lot of it is practice, right? So the way I was trying to find a way to organize this talk in a way that kind of made sense because there's so much different stuff I think we're going to touch upon. And I landed on something might be a little weird, but I think also sort of makes sense and it's interesting. And so I want to kind of weave a tapestry
Okay.
throughout this talk. So there's like kind of a story arc
Okay.
with this thing. And I want to talk about charisma using kind of the extended metaphor of a musical instrument. So,
Like notes.
well, like notes, but just the act of understanding charisma is learning to use that instrument. A lot of people are just not even playing the instrument as they go through life. They have it, but they don't even know that it's there.
Well, I never even thought of it
Right.
like a personality
Yeah.
being like an instrument.
And so I don't think this is like, I'm the only one who sort of thinks about it. So for example, the psychologist Daniel Goleman, who coined the term emotional intelligence, at one point in time also coined a term called resonant leadership to talk about basically like powerful leaders, right? So even in that case, psychologists, as doing the research, they're referring to whatever this thing that's happening as a form of resonance. So like when an acoustic sound wave matches the frequency of an object, it can make the object vibrate.
Oh,
Right.
100%. Yes.
And so there's actual like work where people are studying resonant leadership, like at Case Western University, and they're talking about it as a form of like, again, this thing that kind of causes a vibration through organizations, and whether a leader is resonant or dissonant. And the other aspect I think that's good about talking about charisma as kind of a musical instrument is all of a sudden you're talking about something that is learnable, right? Because again, if you think about this old way of thinking of charisma, even back in ancient days, where it was something that's given to somebody, you were blessed, given grace, right? But it is a learnable skill if you think of it as an instrument.
Well, I've never really thought about charisma, just on a personal level. I don't. It's not like I sit there and just think, oh, how do you be charismatic?
Yeah,
how
you
do
need to
I
be a
break it down?
psychology nerd to do that.
Exactly. It's like that level of curiosity has never really been there for me. But now that I'm hearing about it, now I'm getting really curious about this. The fact that you can actually learn to be charismatic is such a powerful thing. Like just knowing, hey, there's a superhero inside of you, right? If you just learn these skills, you're able to create emotional resonance, right? Almost like an instrument.
Almost like an instrument. So the promise that I want to make is that if you think about charisma like learning a guitar, right? Obviously, there's people who spend a lifetime playing guitar and become complete virtuosos. Eddie Van Halen, Joe Satriani, those incredible like Spanish flamenco players. That's obviously something that requires a lifetime to learn, right? But at the same time, many people know, like, you can pick up a guitar and you can learn a few chords and you can learn to play Wonderwall by Oasis, right? Or you can learn to play Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. And you can have very quickly a very powerful effect on people. And so to even get your beginning kind of toe in the water with how charisma works, you don't need to learn to be a virtuoso at it. You just need to be able to even just learn the basic chords.
Just the power chords.
Just the power chords, right? And the power chords will get you most of the way there.
Just need to know the three different chords.
You just need to learn how to play.
3 power chords.
Yeah, 3 power chords. You just need to learn how to play Wonderwall, right? And so the goal by the end of this conversation is hopefully you'll be able to now go out in the world and play Wonderwall.
Wow. Okay, I'm so excited. All right, let's get started.
All right.
How do you develop charisma, Gene?
All right. So the 4 sections of this talk to kind of organize it. So the first section is going to be learning to hear the music, right? So becoming aware of this hidden force of charisma and kind of this underlying layer of communication. Because again, people see that somebody has a social magnetism, but they don't really realize what's going on, what's happening there, right? So the first kind of step is being able to see it, right? Second kind of phase or stage is going to be playing the chords, right? So it's the psychological recipe of charisma, kind of the broad brushstrokes, and what various psychological research has shown to be the broad brushstrokes of charisma, which once you kind of get the recipe and you sort of start seeing it places, it's actually pretty easy to start implementing it as you use it in life, right? Next stage after that is something I call, taking the stage, where it's when you take charisma to a mass audience. It's where we can sort of talk about how charisma works in leadership and how charisma works, again, when you're sort of communicating to a large group of people. Because one of the things that I went through kind of my journey about thinking about charisma all the way from high school to now is at one point I realized there's a distinct difference between, again, stage charisma, which is the ability to kind of emanate an energy at a group of people and have those people take on that energy. And then personal charisma, which is about creating a sense of connection with a person one-on-one. And so stage charisma is it's kind of a one-way thing, but personal charisma is actually more complicated because it's a two-way process.
I never thought about it like that.
It's just as much about making somebody feel heard and understood and creating that bubble where you two get wrapped in a bubble together. And that's personal charisma, and that requires like more intricacy. And what interestingly, I think people might find cool about that section is we're going to talk about some lessons from FBI hostage negotiators.
Ooh.
Right? Because they have had to develop certain techniques, right? And methods of communicating, right? Because nothing gets more intimate than a hostage negotiation.
Yeah, life or death situation.
It's a life or death situation where they have to be able to exert influence on somebody.
So that's the level of skill that you have to develop is life and death. And
right.
Someone's life depends on your ability to literally turn those knobs.
And an FBI hostage negotiator, Chris Voss, wrote an incredible book called Never Split the Difference. My boss here, Spike, actually is the one who forced me to read it. He's like, you have to read it twice. And I've read it 3 times now.
Can you explain just briefly what it means to split the difference?
Never split it. Well, so basically the idea that there used to be a theory in negotiation, right, in academia, because most negotiation happens in business situations, where you'd be negotiating with somebody and be like, I want to, get $100 million, and the other person would be like, I'm only willing to pay $50 million. And eventually the negotiation is like you guys trying to meet in the middle. You split the difference between the two ideas, right? But in hostage negotiation, you can't get back half a hostage, right? There's no splitting the difference. So what they had to do is they had to completely rework their doctrine of communication to communicate on this level below logic to try to, again, exert an irrational influence on the hostage taker to be able to get the result of hopefully saving the hostage's life.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Irrational influence, but that makes so much sense again because if you're a hostage negotiator, right?
Yeah.
You're literally talking to a crazy lunatic where logic,
Maybe.
I mean, well, maybe, but
Desperate person,
someone
potentially.
who's really desperate,
Yeah.
someone who's maybe very emotional.
Uh-huh.
But you're saying there's a way to like influence them through these techniques.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about these
Okay,
techniques.
so we'll hopefully that'll
okay.
keep you hooked until the end. All right. I have a lot of notes for this one. All right, so circa 2005, sophomore year, high school, right? You know, it's not that I'm not socially successful, but I'm definitely inconsistent, right? I'm a more of a naturally shy person. I'm an introvert, you know, and in high school, I think oftentimes the first time you become aware, I think, of charisma is early in life, is in high school or in school with dating and with popularity games. You very quickly figure out whether or not you have this thing or you don't.
Yeah.
And so, you know, as I was in high school, like I was sort of kind of, you know, observing things as I do, psychology nerd, and trying to see, like, I don't understand, like, why are these jackasses who are so popular? Like, you know, why are all the pretty girls gravitating to them? You know, why do they have like adoring fans, while me on the other side, like, you know, racked with like teenage social anxiety, there'd be like an impenetrable wall of like I can't break through, right?
Yeah.
And so the theme of this section is learning to hear the music. It's kind of becoming aware of this, the hidden forces and this underlayer of the phenomenon of charisma, right? Because it's the first step to be able to start playing the instrument of charisma. And naturally, somebody who's kind of looking at the social puzzle, trying to figure out, like, what is going on here? How do you solve this? You know, I started looking for books, right? And sometime around 2005, I discovered, and I think I pirated, a book by a gentleman named David D'Angelo called Double Your Dating. Now, David D'Angelo had this incredible ability to condense very powerful insights into a single phrase.
Okay.
Like, it's an amazing ability, right? And there's a couple of phrases that he coined that we're going to talk about because they help, again, understand this thing. One we're going to talk about now, and one we're going to get to in a little bit. So he coined this phrase that probably a lot of people might have heard on the internet, but not even know that he's the one who wrote it. But attraction is not a choice.
Whoa. That's deep.
And what he's trying to say with this idea is that when it comes to dating and to charisma also broadly, right, is that it's not a choice. You cannot logic somebody into being attracted to you or into liking you.
Wow.
And by the same token, even if somebody consciously wants to feel attracted to you and like you, they can't logic themselves into it. Right? That's a lot of times that could be the tragedy of certain relationships where there'd be two people who are perfect for each other. But if they're not feeling that chemistry, that spark or whatever it is, no matter how like on paper it's perfect, attraction is not a choice.
Wow. That's so I mean, that's so different from how, you know, most people I guess think about relationships. You know, you choose somebody, swipe left or right. But now that I think about it more, you're absolutely spot on, because there are certain, you know, guys or women out there where it's like you don't even have to think about it, like if you'd want to date them, right?
Well, yeah, and similarly, there's people who are attracted to people who are not very good for them either, right? Things that are very, very bad.
Yeah.
You know, there's you know, it can get, again, pretty tragic because a lot of these things are happening on these levels, on these signals that are below, again, conscious communication, that we spend the most amount of time thinking about, right? We're very biased, I think, thinking about communication as words, as logical ideas, but there's so much happening underneath. There's this hidden layer of everything, of every move that everyone's making. And so the first step of starting to understand charisma, right, is that attraction is not a choice. Not only in dating, but just in general. Like, you can't logic somebody into feeling this thing. And there's also this phrase, logic makes us think, emotion makes us act.
That's so true.
Right.
Yeah.
So this hidden underlayer of communication, one of the ways, again, with this extended metaphor of music, we can think about it. It's like listening to a band or a song, but only being aware of the lyrics. Right. And a lot of people who might not be musicians might not be, when they're listening to like a Taylor Swift song, right, which are perfectly sculpted pop anthems, they might only be listening to the lyrics, maybe the vocal melody, right, but they're not aware of all the other aspects, the components that are going into it, where something is changing like every 3 seconds. There's, what are the drums doing towards creating the mood? What is the bass doing towards creating mood? What is the string section doing? The harmonies, all these different elements that are coming into play. You're not consciously thinking about them, but if those things weren't there, you wouldn't feel what you felt about the song.
No, that's such a great analogy, because the words is kind of like the logic, right?
Right.
It's literally telling a story, but that's not what music is.
Right.
Music has two components, which is the melody and the song lyrics. But a lot of it is just emotions, how you feel, right? When you listen to music.
Exactly. You can't logic yourself into liking a song,
That's true.
right? It's the same thing.
Yeah, 100%.
You cannot logic yourself into liking a song.
That the light bulb just went off right there.
It's either sending the signal
Yeah.
that's tickling the right parts of the brain in you, or it's not sending that signal to you. You cannot logic yourself into liking a song.
That's crazy.
So people who compose music, they become masters at understanding, like, okay, these are the components that need to happen. They need to have a rhythm that does this, that makes this mood, this feeling, right? And so thinking from that kind of metaphor, communication is very much a 4-dimensional aspect, right? It's not just text. It's not just the lyrics of a song or of a speech. It's all these other elements that combine together, including time in terms of a story arc, right? Where in our previous conversations, we've talked about how glamour and charisma are opposites of each other, right? Glamour is a glimpse of a moment, right? It's a mysterious glimpse of a moment that has people project into it, right? While charisma is an experience, right? So glamour is silent, while charisma is verbal. Glamour is best captured by photograph, a single moment in time, while charisma has to be in some way live action, whether it's video or it's in person.
Okay.
And all of these aspects basically come into play where if you're not aware of this 4-dimensional level of communication, then when you're looking at, the popular jackass in high school, who people are gravitating towards, you're going to be very confused because you don't understand, like, he's being mean, he's being a dick, but people are laughing, people are, for some reason gravitating towards him, right?
Yeah.
So from the research side, the MIT Media Lab created a negotiation analyzer program, right, that could predict the success of a business pitch, a sales call, or a negotiation with 87% accuracy without a single word of content.
What? That is so high.
Right.
Wait,
The voice.
what do you mean by without a single word of
So
content?
basically, they would be able to record a thing, a conversation or whatever, run it through this voice analyzer type thing, And without a single word of content, this voice analyzer would able to figure out the outcome of the negotiation with 87% accuracy.
What? Just the tone of the voice?
So yeah, and so like some of the things they're looking at is the level of stress in a voice, the level of vocal mirroring. So how much people were taking on the inflections between each other. So like slowly, as people are sort of vibing and developing rapport, their vocal inflections start looking more and more like each other. Right? Basically, how much engagement there was, like how much they were like balancing who was talking and who wasn't. Right? And so they were able to run everything through this vocal analyzer and then detect with 87% accuracy whether or not this was going to be a successful sales pitch or not. Right? So again, this is what when we're talking about learning to listen to the music. This is like that four-dimensional object of communication. There's this deeper level that is existing.
Wow.
Right? And there's very commonly known things, like, for example, people can hear a smile over a telephone. It's a very common thing, like salespeople do. Like when you smile on a telephone, people can actually hear that you're smiling in your voice.
It's probably even like subconsciously, that's
well, I mean, subconsciously, you become aware of these little things. Like it changes the timbre of your voice.
Yeah.
And people can hear this, right? Wow. And again, in the context, again, of human evolution, depending on where you kind of put the starting line, in the context of human evolution, it's been around 6 million years, but language, as we know it, has only been around for maybe 200,000. So there's millions of years of communication that what happens in our ancestral past that was happening without language.
I mean, now that you frame it like that, that means we're almost built, right, from an evolutionary standpoint, to kind of interpret all of these kind of communication methods that doesn't even require words.
Exactly.
That's just blows my mind again, because we had a whole episode about body language, and we're just communicating all the time, but we're also receiving communication all the time, but we're not conscious of it, right? And it affects us emotionally, but it's hard to recognize that sometimes when you're being influenced or manipulated or being sold, or being like, hey, here's my money, right? Like after, you get a really good sales pitch, or you see a really good, a TikTok ad or something. It's like, the tone of the voice, the delivery, everything besides the words is probably, to your point, 87% of the sale.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just crazy.
It's pretty powerful. And I mean, words still matter, but we do have a certain bias towards, I think, language and logic sometimes. And I think generally the people who struggle the most with a concept like charisma are the ones who are more in that camp. While you might have somebody who has, I guess, what you would call a higher level of maybe emotional intelligence, who is operating in they're playing a completely different game, right? So they're playing an instrument.
Yeah.
Right. Well, while you're trying to logically convince people to like you.
We're like writing in journals, and they're playing musical instruments. That's like
exactly.
That's
it's a completely different game. So learning to hear the music is a very important part of this thing. So one of the things that happened that kind of helps us get a sense of what the potential components of charisma are is that there was a study in 2010 by Ana Vercic at the University of Zagreb that tried to do a factor analysis of charisma, which is basically, you do a study, you have people rank how charismatic somebody is, and a factor analysis is something that's trying to tease apart, okay, so you're getting a score, a charisma score, right? It's trying to tease apart what factors move the needle one way or the other. So you have you figure out, you give somebody a score on charisma, but you're also being questioned about other aspects about that person. You try to figure out what factors are the ones actually moving the needle in terms of that overall outcome of whether someone is being perceived charismatic.
Yeah. Okay.
And in order of contribution, here are the kind of the factors they kind of came up with. Right? So one is somebody's communicative, right? And it factored for 17.8% of the variance. And in this, basically, it reflects how good of an orator a person is, how eloquent and comfortable they are speaking, and how rich in expressiveness they are. Right?
Yeah.
Which calls back to, one, our conversation with Dr. Ian Silva about ancient Rome and the importance of becoming a great orator,
Right.
somebody who speaks well, who's eloquent, and also, the body language episode about expressiveness, right? The richness of expressiveness.
No, it's totally true because even in Roman times, they use body language a lot. Like, people say Italians talk with their hands. Where did that come from? Right?
Yeah.
It came from the Romans, because any great orator would almost kind of like be saying something and they would have different gestures while they're talking.
The next most important component in terms of, again, moving the needle of charisma is inspires or attracts admiration with 14% of the variance. So the first one's 17%. This is 14%. We're kind of moving down.
Okay.
So someone who elicits admiration, who kind of draws attention easily, and who inspires. All right.
Okay.
Next, honest and reliable. All right. So something about, again, somebody being perceived as having integrity and bravery and kind of honesty is a big factor, 12.3%. Right.
Wow.
Only at 0.4 do we get to attractive.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Which accounts for 10%
What?
of whether somebody's perceived as charismatic.
I thought that would be a lot higher for some reason.
I think people always think that, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, looks matter. Being attractive is a factor in how we perceive the world, how we perceive people. But in the grand scope of charisma, it's not about looks. There's plenty of people who never had looks who are incredibly charismatic.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the factors that can go into this kind of larger thing that's going on. Then this is followed by common visionary, and finally by powerful and dominant. The perception of somebody being powerful and dominant.
Oh, interesting.
And so, and again, like, I think the looks thing is kind of an important thing to bring up, because I think a lot of people are under the assumption that looks are a major part of charisma. And looks actually probably are more of a major part of glamour. Right? Because you can have a very highly attractive people, but when they open their mouth,
The illusion is gone.
the illusion can be broken if
Yeah.
they're not somebody who has mastered the ability to communicate
Got
very
it.
well. So glamour, again, it's about a glimpse of a moment. It's about, the dream of who that person might be. Right?
Yeah.
But charisma, again, is about somebody who is able to give somebody an experience, a story arc, a mood. And so while it's important to look your best and try to, again, optimize that, it is not even in the top 3.
Now, again, that makes a lot of sense because, when you think about people who are charismatic are the most successful influencers,
Yeah.
right? So you see people on TikTok or Instagram and YouTube just literally talking in front of the camera, and they're not necessarily the prettiest people out there. There's a lot of like average dudes who just love talking on camera, but the amount of followers and influence and views that they get it's almost like it helps to be good looking, but it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't. And again, potentially a person might be perceived as better looking because they're charismatic, and not vice versa.
Right. right.
There's plenty of actors you can think about who might not be that attractive, right? If you just did a pure analysis of facial symmetry or something, right? You can think about I don't know, Adrian Brody, Tom Hardy,
Yeah.
right? If you didn't know who they were, you walked them by on the street, they'd be like, oh, it's kind of a regular dude, but they have such this energy, right? Among women, for example, Lady Gaga is gorgeous, right? But she's gorgeous because she's Lady Gaga, right?
Yeah.
So she created this entire thing, this mystique about her.
Yeah.
So her charisma is the thing that actually makes her more attractive. And again, we spent a lot of time talking last time about Marilyn Monroe. I would say the same thing about Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah.
You know, if you didn't know she was Marilyn Monroe, she might actually be considered kind of generic in terms of her beauty. But she did her thing. She took on that alter ego and she transformed. And that elevated people's perception of her beauty.
Yeah. Her talking extended her attractiveness.
Her talking, her walk, all
And her
these
walk,
all the
body
other things.
language.
Again, this whole 4-dimensional idea of who she became.
It was very direct.
Yeah. So one thing kind of important to bring up with looks is the halo effect, which is this bias that people have, where if somebody is attractive, like if somebody is 10 out of 10 on looks, we have this illogical bias that they're also 10 out of 10 on success, 10 out of 10 on intelligence, 10 out of 10 on confidence, all these other things. Because for whatever reason, our brain connects like, oh, so if somebody's really good at one thing, they must be good at other things.
Oh, yeah.
And so with halo effect, it's one of those things that people need to become aware of, that we often if somebody is physically attractive, we overestimate their competency in other factors.
Yeah.
It's a bias in that direction.
So we have to be consciously aware.
Just, I mean, they might be very competent, but generally speaking, the error goes in the direction of you think people are more competent if they look a particular way.
Interesting.
More talented, right?
Yeah.
And so, out of the Art of Seduction, probably my favorite story out of this Art of Seduction is the story of this guy named Gabriele D'Annunzio.
Okay.
And so Gabriele D'Annunzio was this Italian poet at the beginning of the 1900s. And he started off as a society journalist. But he's this guy, he's short, he's small, he's bald, he has like blotchy skin. Oftentimes people would make fun of him and describe him as the gargoyle.
The gargoyle.
The gargoyle.
That's not very flattering.
And he was a society journalist, so he would basically write about, what's going on in high society. And the noblemen saw him as this ugly gargoyle guy, and so they didn't feel at all ever threatened about like having him left alone with the wives, right? But one thing that Gabriele D'Annunzio had was he apparently had the most magnificent voice.
Oh.
People describe it as hypnotic, and he just had this way with words. He's a poet. And very quickly he basically ended up betting half the Italian society ladies that are out there.
The gargoyle.
And they loved him so much that they helped basically launch his literary career. And he became a massive literary figure.
Interesting.
When World War I started, he decided to learn how to fly a plane, and he sort of transitioned in Italian society into this war hero. Got all these medals, became this war hero. And what would happen is that this ugly little gargoyle guy with this magnificent voice would sometimes come out on his balcony, right? And there'd be people just waiting outside his balcony just to hear him speak.
Wow.
Right? Because he's now developed. He has this way of speaking, but he now has this aura. He's developed this. He's both a literary figure. He's this military war hero, and one day, he's speaking, angrily about how Italy had to give up this city in the post-war agreement, and the result of it happened is that him and 2,500 of his followers ended up marching on the city in the north of Italy and capturing it.
Wow.
Along the way, one of the Italian generals tries to stop him because, this is against the treaty that Italy signed, right? And he pulls his pistol on Gabriele D'Annunzio. And Gabriele D'Annunzio tells him, like, sure, shoot me first, but shoot me here. And he opens up his jacket, and he's covered in medals. And the Italian...
Oh, my God.
And the Italian general falls on his knees and starts crying and joins Gabriele D'Annunzio's cause.
What? That's amazing.
So D'Annunzio ends up taking over this city, Fiume.
Okay.
It's now it's in Croatia, but at this point in time, he takes over this city, and he wants Italy to take the city, to annex the city. But because of the agreement, like they signed a treaty, like Italy's like, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. And so he ends up basically declaring independence and becoming dictator of the city. And for about 2 years before, the army is able to get him to surrender. And even though like he did all this stuff, basically he was so popular, he just went home and just continued with his life. Now, the danger of the D'Annunzio story is an incredible story. Again, a guy who's not good looking, a guy who has a magnificent voice, who has a good way with words, kind of grew from nobody to becoming this leader. The danger of this story is that one of the people who was paying attention to him and was inspired by him was a guy named Benito Mussolini.
Oh, really? Okay.
And so Benito Mussolini modeled himself on what he saw D'Annunzio being able to do.
No way.
And if you think about it, Hitler then proceeded to model himself on Benito Mussolini.
Wow. Just created this domino effect.
Right? Because they saw what was possible.
Wow. The power of charisma.
The power of charisma.
Wow.
Irrational influence.
Wow.
So again, there's you can be kind of ordinary and be very charismatic. And charisma, as we talked about, can be a dangerous force, especially in the wrong hands. Right? In 2008, I graduated high school, and into the height of the great financial crisis. I decided to take a gap year instead of going to college. And I talked my way into working for this real estate investment marketing company. Very quickly, I discovered that this company basically sells get-rich-quick schemes and seminars and stuff like that. So I kind of got to witness the seminar industry. I don't know if you've ever been around seminars.
Never been to a seminar.
You kind of heard about them, right?
Yeah.
And I got to meet and see a lot of the speakers on the circuit. And this is kind of the first time where I think I became aware of the dark side of charisma. Right? You have these like huge hotel ballrooms, and they're filled with desperate people seeking an answer in a troubled time. You have these very charismatic speakers whispering sweet honey into their eager ears, right? But behind closed doors, their eyes are dead, and their souls are cold. Right.
Wow.
So one of the things I witnessed in this situation is that a lot of the people who do like these kind of seminar type things, they're one face when they're on stage, but behind closed doors, it's a very, very different story.
So you actually saw this?
I witnessed this. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, this is why, like, for example, I have that phrase. I'm very skeptical of highly charismatic people.
Yeah.
Because I think people who oftentimes naturally develop charisma on their own are usually being driven by very strong psychological hungers.
Yeah.
Right? Like narcissistic personality disorder kind of thing. And that's why I think it's very important for people who are not driven by those things is to become aware of how charisma works, because to, again, balance it out, right? Because the people who naturally become very good at it, oftentimes lean more towards like con artistry or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I got to witness it. It was like, I remember there was a moment in time, this like little old couple, signed over a check for like $75,000, probably from like the retirement fund or something, for a get rich quick scheme that almost certainly is worthless. Right? This little old couple basically signed over $75,000.
That's crazy.
And I learned a lot in that place about, I guess, how I don't want to do business. But one of the important things that did happen there was at one point in time, they invested in this marketing course from this famed marketing thinker named Eben Pagan.
Okay.
And I think I might have been the only one actually like went through the course. Like they spent like $15,000 on this thing.
Oh, that's so expensive. That's just wild.
And I think I was the only one actually like downloaded the videos and like watched them and the kind of thing. And this is one of the first places where I became introduced to like concepts like, marketing to everybody's marketing to nobody.
Yeah.
If you can describe somebody's problem to them better than they can, they automatically and consciously assume you are the solution, right? These ideas, right? These kind of this synthesis.
Yeah.
And Eben Pagan, is a brilliant advertiser and thinker. And as I was watching these videos, one of the things I found kind of strange was like something seeming familiar about him. And then, plot twist: Eben Pagan is David D'Angelo.
So you saw that in him?
No, he is David D'Angelo.
Wait. Literally?
He is literally David D'Angelo.
What?
So Eben Pagan,
Uh-huh.
when he wrote his dating book, he wrote it as an alter ego.
What?
So-
That's crazy.
I know. Isn't that crazy
Wow.
coincidence? And so in a lot of ways, Eben Pagan is kind of an intellectual godfather of the Manipulation Games podcast. Because again, like his writings on dating were profound. Again, because he thinks about psychology, about people, about these things. Attraction is not a choice.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
Wild.
he has the ability to condense these same ideas in terms of influence in a marketplace, in terms of advertising, how you take a message and you condense it and you make people get things
Well, I mean,
right
it's
away.
the same thing. I mean, whether it's dating or marketing or like influence, it's the same formula.
It's a manipulation game.
Yeah, that's so crazy.
So plot twist: Eben Pagan
that's
is
funny.
David D'Angelo. So here, this is where we go in to start talking about playing the chords.
Okay, so we have to pay attention first
Yeah.
to the music.
You have to
and
be-
that's really important. That was very profound because again, like it's hearing the melodies and recognizing.
It's
things.
recognizing that something is happening here. That if you're only paying attention to the kind of surface level, you would naturally be very confused. Like, why is that person succeeding? Why is that person so socially magnetic? Well, what are they doing? Why are they, again, blessed?
Yeah.
Right.
So let's talk about playing the chords.
All right. So David D'Angelo, the psychological recipe that he coined, that again, these are the chords to be charismatic, the broad brushstrokes. He came up with a phrase called being cocky funny.
Cocky funny.
Right. That's what he was able to boil it down to.
Okay. Yeah.
So what he came up with is the idea that to be charismatic and to be attractive, you have to tap into this balance of fun arrogance. Right?
Yeah.
So it's a balance between bravado and people around you having a good time.
Interesting.
Right? So if you're only fun, then you are perceived as a clown, as a dancing monkey, as just entertainment, as a tryhard, as a weirdo, right? But if you're only cocky and arrogant, then you're perceived as a jerk and you'll turn people off, right? But when put together and these two dynamics are balanced, it's dynamite.
You're blowing my mind right now,
Right.
Gene.
Well, Eben Pagan / David D'Angelo blew my mind
amazing.
when I was 15 years old.
Oh my God, it's so true.
So think adventure heroes, right? In movies and books, their swagger is fun arrogance. It's like
Yeah.
Chris Pratt, in like adventure movies, or
Yeah.
Indiana Jones, or any kind of things. It's this combination between, again, this cockiness and this fun energy, right? Tony Stark. I mean, anyone. That's like
Yeah.
it's the formula. But the thing about cocky funny, it's also when you're feeling naturally among friends. This is the way people act when they're around their friends.
Yeah, they crack jokes.
They
and
crack jokes.
They don't care what people say.
They tease each other. They
Right.
mess around. They say
Right.
ridiculous things.
That's interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So by being the right amount, the right balance of cocky funny with somebody new, you have the ability to create the illusion that you guys already are friends.
Wow, you're just tapping in.
You're tapping
to that
into this
friendly
thing,
banter.
into this friendly banter.
Wow,
Right.
that's amazing.
And so, again, it's very important to kind of calibrate what the combination of this balance is, right? So, for example, if you're somebody who's very, very high status, and you're talking to somebody who perceives you as high status and they're kind of lower status than you can't be overly arrogant, right? You have to be more fun, because again, you have to balance yourself to the situation.
Yeah.
While if you're somebody who's actually lower status, right? So for example, like, Gabriele D'Annunzio could very likely get away with being a little bit more arrogant because he's kind of this ugly gargoyle guy. I don't want to call him ugly. That's so mean. But he was considered not classically attractive.
I want to see a picture of this guy. I'm just curious.
We'll find out.
Okay.
The only sad thing is that there's no real recordings of him speaking. There's like one little news clip I found, but it's like him like saying only a few things from the distance, like reading Dante.
Oh my gosh. That would be so amazing. I'm just imagining in my head, maybe it's a glamour thing kicking in. The movie trailer voice.
Maybe it might be movie
In a
trailer
world.
voice. It could be. I don't know. It could be a Morgan Freeman voice. It could be. I don't know. There's so many different kind of people who speak very well. I imagine if people get chosen to be narrators for like documentaries.
Yeah.
Might be
Like that.
good
voice.
choices. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
And so again, like, you have to calibrate kind of that kind of arrogance level. Now, again, this is something that David D'Angelo kind of came up with and kind of got it down to this one phrase: cocky, funny. But he's not the only one who saw this, right? And so Olivia Fox Cabane, who wrote the book The Charisma Myth, she talks about the formula for charisma as the balance between power, warmth, and she talks about this other idea called presence, which kind of comes up in the personal charisma, which is the ability to be tuned in the bubble, right? But she talks about the concept of it's a balance between power and warmth, right? I also ended up finding this gentleman's PhD thesis while I was doing research, right?
Okay.
Konstantin Tsakay, in 2016, he wrote his PhD thesis at University of Toronto, and he did another kind of factor analysis type thing about looking at different charismatic traits in people, and he found that they all kind of moved as a cluster. And the two clusters he came up with was influence and affability.
Affability. What do you mean by affability?
Affability, again, it's like positive energy,
Okay.
levity, high mood.
Okay.
So if you start noticing this pattern, right? David D'Angelo, cocky, funny.
Yeah.
Olivia Fox Cabane, power and warmth. This PhD thesis, influence and affability. So the recipe for charisma is coming from multiple directions.
Yeah.
It is some balance between, again, a power dynamic and a dynamic of making people around you feel good in some way, which also ironically is what we talked about in the body language episode about threat level and expressiveness.
Yeah, you have to almost lower your threat level a lot because just, again, subconsciously, we're always analyzing the threat level of another person.
Right. So
That's
it's kind of it's how much power somebody is projecting in a situation. But again, what all these guys are getting at is that charisma does not work if there is no power. Right.
Okay.
You could be very warm. You could be very funny. You can be very affable, but power is projecting power is a core aspect of it. It's the projection of power wrapped in this warmth, this positive energy.
That sounds kind of scary, like a scary recipe, though, because like if you do need that power, or if you do have power, you probably have a higher influence, right? Ability to influence people.
Yeah.
If you're able to dial those knobs correctly.
Yeah. And so again, by simply having power, right, you're already getting half of the charisma formula.
Yeah.
Right. That's why a lot of times you can have somebody who you already has power. Like, for example, somebody you see on television has power in the sense that there's somebody who's already kind of made it there.
Yeah.
And therefore, they don't have to dial up that arrogance aspect of cocky, funny as much. And they could play the part of being warm. Right. But if somebody who just walk off the street is not projecting any power level, right, just being fun and warm and expressive is not going to be enough to create this phenomenon.
Yeah. Fascinating.
So there are a lot of different kind of styles of charisma that exist, right? So again, cocky funny is one example of it, but there's different forms of power, and there's different forms of warmth, and so there's an entire gamut of how different people do it. Like going from Winston Churchill to the Dalai Lama, it's a very different style of charisma, but they're both tapping into the idea of power and warmth, right? Winston Churchill is very abrasive, but hilarious. Dalai Lama, very calm, spiritual power, right? Impressive in that sense, but very warm and compassionate. So it's that kind of balance. So the forms of power are, and here I wrote down this the famous quote from Henry Kissinger: "Power is the ultimate aphrodisiac."
Okay.
So violence is a form of power, right? So if you think about just going all the way back to the beginning, just brute physical capacity, somebody being physically larger, somebody carrying a weapon, or somebody being able to lead a military force, right?
Yeah.
Wealth, economic power is a form of power. Obviously, political power in terms of leadership and the ability to kind of negotiate things with people. Intelligence, skill, or talent is a form of power, right? So think, a doctor. If you have one doctor in the village, and he knows things that other people don't know, that's a very big form of power. An engineer, right? Or even a musician, talent, right? Doing something others cannot do. That's a form of power. Also knowing something that others don't. So if you think about like intelligence services and spies, being able to be an information broker, knowing things that others don't but want to know, is a form of power. Then there's social power like fame, right? Or like, how much of a following you have. Beauty and attractiveness, right? Is a form of social power, right? So if somebody's very, very physically attractive, you're already projecting some form of power. So you might need to focus more on projecting warmth. Right? Again, if you're calibrating on this whole level. Because for the charisma for everybody is going to look a little bit different because we're all coming from different starting points.
Yeah, we have different personalities, again, like different amounts of money. I like how you mentioned just the intelligence factor, because I'm sure a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not rich, I don't have that much power. But we all have the ability to gain power through just by being smart or having a skill that is desirable.
That is valuable, to people. The dandy bucking social norms. So in The Art of Seduction, one of the things he talks about is there's this archetype that comes up, like Oscar Wilde or Marlene Dietrich, people who they're projecting power because they're kind of breaking with social norms, right? So, for example, like a woman who, like Marlene Dietrich, would walk around wearing a suit in a time when it was not considered like normal, right? So, bucking social norms, and again, if you balance it with the right amount of warmth, you can get away with things. Right, so there's this whole aspect of people who just can get away with things that other people can't get away with. Right, the ability to say things that others aren't willing to say. Right, that's can be a form of power. Again, there's entire news organizations and YouTube channels that are formed simply because they're talking about things that other people are too shy to say.
That is so true, because I was again kind of researching some of this myself about why celebrities are so charismatic, and someone on Instagram mentioned that they're just really comfortable in being misunderstood, or like these personalities, right, who are on YouTube or who are on these comedy shows, right? They're totally comfortable just knowing that, okay, half of the people are going to misunderstand me, but I'm okay with that. And that's the kind of that cocky, funny energy.
And we have that idea. Haters are good.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have haters, you must be doing something
right.
Right,
You're definitely attracting if you have haters.
Right, because they see you as a threat in some way. That's usually kind of this weird like response where people are only trying to tear you down because they see you as something worthy of being torn down.
Oh, interesting. That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
In terms of like people being willing to say something that others aren't willing to say. Like I remember like the meteoric rise of Jordan Peterson, right? Is because he was going against whatever that decision was in Canada, and all of a sudden, he was talking against it, and that sort of brought him to attention.
Interesting.
And again, he had all those courses already on YouTube for the longest time. But what happened is the fact that he kind of was trying to stand up to one of the laws that he thought wasn't, wasn't good in Canada, right? Then there's like silly forms of like momentary power, right? Like the guy with the keg at the college party, or the bouncer who decides who gets led into the nightclub.
Yeah, that's funny.
The bartender at the nightclub.
Yeah.
In any other context, that wouldn't be power. But within that one scenario, that is power.
Yeah.
So these are the different kinds of forms of power. So you might not think of yourself as powerful, or maybe you don't think of yourself as somebody who has the capacity to project power, but there's so many different ways of projecting power. I imagine you could probably find your style among all those that we just mentioned.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Then obviously, so you're taking power and you want to combine it with some form of warmth, right? One of the big ones is expressiveness. There used to be a psychologist named Howard Friedman, right? And for a while, he was arguing that charisma was expressiveness. And he has this entire scale, which talks about like how you measure somebody's level of nonverbal expressiveness. But what people kind of, as they started looking at this question of charisma, what they realized is that all the people he was analyzing were leaders in positions of power, right? So expressiveness is an important part of that warmth equation, but he was neglecting that idea, like, we're looking at people who already are on a stage, on a platform, and then they're just more expressive than others, right? And so it's like all those ideas, like how much you fluctuate your voice, how much energy there is, in the way you're communicating. Some of the things he was looking at in terms of his like diagnostic for levels of expressiveness is like when you hear good dance music, you can hardly keep still, right? That's a sign of high expressiveness. You easily express emotion over the phone. You often touch friends during conversations. You are able to give a seductive glance if you want to. You're good at pantomime, as in games like charades, right? You show that you like somebody by hugging or touching a person. Like these are some of the clues that they were looking at for like high expressiveness. So a lot of times I think people, especially when they're feeling uncomfortable in situations, they're not being expressive enough. And that's one of the things they can sort of add to the thing. So warmth could be being funny or being fun. It could be highly expressive. It can be compassionate. It can be giving people hope or a vision of something to go towards. A lot of charismatic leaders, that's what they lean on. They're like, this is where we're going, the vision, right? And essentially it's in some way elevating the positive feelings in people in some form. So the basic, playing the chords, the recipe for charisma is somehow multiplying the projection of power with the projection of warmth.
Wow, that's so cool. And I like how you broke down power as not just what we would think as obvious. It's like just, you have like strength, right?
Yeah.
In whatever like monetary or whether your position of power.
Yeah.
There's a huge spectrum of power. And it could just be something that's relevant to, that night, like being a bartender, being in control of like who gets to order the drinks first, right? Or let you in the door, right? That's a form of power. But then also warmth, there's a whole spectrum of qualities of warmth that aren't necessarily just being fully expressive, you know, in your facial emotions. That's something that's part that could be one variable, but other could be just being funny, telling a joke, and finding that fine balance between power and the warmth.
Yeah, so it's finding that balance. Again, warmth could be just giving people hope,
Yeah.
right? Warmth can be just paying attention to somebody. Again, the Dalai Lama would have a very different charisma than like a Russell Brand,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But again, they're both kind of invoking these aspects. They have some sort of power,
Right.
and they have some sort of positive energy they're able to project at people.
Yeah, the Dalai Lama has the power to basically influence the masses by saying something to a bunch of people who will listen to him.
Well, he has a position of power.
He's in
Yeah.
a position of power, right? But again, like the whole idea that the Dalai Lama and Russell Brand, they're both charismatic people, but they have a different formula or ratio of these kind of like qualities. But they're both equally very charismatic in their own way, which is so different than I thought I would think of charisma.
Yeah.
Because I always think of just like, again, charisma is just being a person that you just see and just like you can't explain it, right?
Yeah.
But now that you broke it down, like, wow, that's very powerful for a lot of people, I think, listening.
Yeah, and the biggest aspect that people can probably have immediate effect over is the warmth thing. It's probably it's a little harder, I think, to control the power aspect because again, you have to rise up through the ranks in your career. You have to again develop a reputation.
Yeah.
Become physically stronger, whatever it is, right? But you can have an immediate effect on the amount of warmth you're projecting.
Yeah.
And again, you find that balance between power and warmth. And with this, we can proceed to the next phase, taking the stage. So at some point in time, I started, I saw a band play in my high school, and I was like, oh, wow, I want to do that. That's very cool. And I started to kind of try to play music and like sing in bands or whatever it is, but I had this like the most, again, I'm more of a shy person, more an introvert. I had the most like awful, crippling like stage fright. And sometime in university, I discovered there's this like kind of very cool hippie open mic that's happening every week.
Okay.
And I committed myself because I'm stubborn and I get kind of annoyed about certain things. It's like I hated that, like I was experiencing the kind of the stage fright. So I committed to performing there every week.
Wow.
I basically went for like 2-3 years.
Oh, every week?
Every
For
week.
2 to 3 years?
And it was like a form of kind of exposure therapy that kind of by the end of kind of going through that process, I can't even imagine what stage fright feels like. Like I know I had it at one point in time, a long time ago, where I literally...
So you've conquered this by almost like a brute force method.
Kind of brute force, yeah. I mean, again, it's my own wicked form of exposure therapy.
Exposure therapy,
yeah. But
yeah.
you ease yourself into it, and you have to get reps in, right? And so, and that's sort of kind of got me thinking about the idea of like what it means. It means taking the stage. Where a lot of times when people think about charisma, they're thinking about the charisma of leaders, a charisma of people we're seeing on TV, or charisma, again, that is being basically projected at the masses, right? And it's a very different kind of charisma than personal charisma, as I was to find out later.
Yeah.
Because solving stage fright did not, for me, solve any sort of one-on-one social anxiety. I was still like...
That's so funny. So you could be really confident on stage, but if you're like at a party, you'll be like, "Oh, there's a woman."
Yes, exactly. I was like, "Oh, goddamn! I thought I figured this out."
That's hilarious, Gene.
So we'll get to that.
Yeah,
But yeah, so they're like different things. They're different arenas, different worlds. And so when talking about kind of stage charisma, right? Stage charisma seeks to kind of generate a heightened experience in people, right? And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be on stage. Just being a leader of an organization is also a big part of what they're doing. Is they're setting the mood that sort of goes through a group of people, and that affects outcomes. And so the big factor for stage charisma in terms of making people feel things, right, is this idea of emotional contagion, which we did a short video on previously.
Yeah.
So in terms of the power versus warmth formula, if you're somebody already on camera, you're somebody already on stage, you're already projecting power in some form.
Can you explain emotional contagion just so
Yeah.
we know what that means?
So emotional contagion is the fact that emotions can spread through people via these things called mirror neurons. When people observed others experiencing emotions, the same neural circuits in their own brains were activated as if they're experiencing the emotions themselves. This neural mirroring is a foundation for empathy, as it helps individuals feel what others feel. So it's the mechanism that allows us to have empathy. But when it's happening on the level of essentially crowds, it's like when we witness something happening to somebody, our mirror neurons are firing off to try to figure out what are they feeling. But if that emotion is so strong, like it's a rock star or like a preacher on stage or some person, they themselves are going through some sort of heightened experience, it goes like a wave through the crowd and people take it on. And that's why, like, when you have like, DJs like partying or rocking out, they have to, their job is to bring the energy to lift the mood of the entire nightclub.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. And so they're tapping into this concept of emotional contagion, which is the fact that within milliseconds, emotions can transfer from one person to another.
That's such a crazy idea that we can basically resonate or like almost vibrate, like back to your original analogy of like of instruments to emotions. And if it's powerful enough, it will literally travel through an audience like a wave.
If it's powerful enough and if the person's committed enough to it. So when someone smiles or laughs, observers often subconsciously mirror the facial expression, which leads them to then experiencing the corresponding emotion. This is from some research studies I kind of picked up.
Sounds so simple, but it's so true. Yeah.
Researchers found that the process of catching emotions from others happens in milliseconds and is faster than cognitive empathy, which is when you kind of consciously look at a person and try to figure out whether they're sad or happy or not.
Yeah.
So even before conscious awareness, demonstrating how hardwired this mechanism is in humans.
God, that word hardwired is so strong, but it's true. Again, we're so biologically conditioned through evolution, through millions of years, to automatically have these feelings and emotions resonate through us.
Yeah. So
just subconsciously.
For people who are literally on stage doing, trying to do stage charisma, your first duty is actually to bring yourself into a particular state, and then essentially emanate that energy into a group of people, because people's minds are basically like pinging off of like your facial expressions, all the things. Like they're essentially, whenever you look at somebody, in some ways, one part of your brain is imagining what is it like to be them. It's the reason when we watch like a movie and like you see James Bond walking across the screen and we get some kind of vicarious pleasure from it, is that because some part of our brain is like, oh, James Bond, like you're actually experiencing what the character on screen is experiencing. And so when they're going through difficulties and suffering, or there's danger and they're hanging off a cliff or something, like your brain's like, oh, right, because that part of the brain is essentially being hijacked. The empathy wiring of our brain is being hijacked by the movie or by the rock star on stage.
Wow.
And so when it comes to stage charisma, the simple act of being on stage is already, you're in some way projecting your power level, right? The simple act of being on a movie screen, you're already projecting your power level. So the biggest thing to focus on is bringing that emotional contagion and being aware, what is the emotional contagion you are walking through during the day or whenever you're doing that process.
That's again, that light bulb just goes off because you're on stage, you have the power. I like how you said that because it's a formula, it's a combination, right? But you don't have to be, like the definition of power can be so broad just by the fact that you're on stage, you're demonstrating power without even trying. No, you don't even have to know who that person is.
Yeah, you don't have to necessarily show.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that guy's on stage. So I guess, subconsciously we were like, oh, that guy has a lot of power. But then he can just turn that knob, bring the funny in.
Bring the fun, bring the warmth.
Bring the warmth, and probably just control the crowd.
Exactly.
By his charisma.
So that's why, like, in some ways, stage charisma is actually kind of a simpler thing. It's about finding ways of getting yourself into certain emotional states.
Yeah.
And kind of your own internal state management, whatever it takes before you go into situations where you need to project this energy.
Yeah.
And then have people take it on. Again, like doing silly things and rituals and whatever, watching funny videos.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes to get into that state. And then emotional contagion also very much becomes a part of the idea of resonant leadership. So like Daniel Goleman, the guy who came up with the emotional intelligence, is also one of the people who worked heavily on the concept of resonant leadership, which is essentially the study of management, like taking psychology and putting it towards the study of management. And basically looking at what emotional contagion the CEO or a leader of an organization is bringing to the organization, and how that's affecting the actual outcomes of that group of people. And so, again, some more fun facts, psych research. CEOs directly contribute about half of a company's reputation and market valuation.
Half. That's crazy.
There's like, for example, there's, these famous stories about like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk being described as people who have a reality distortion field. So whenever they're in the room or they're around people, they're literally distorting people's reality with how committed they are to their idea. They're zealous. They're religiously committed to whatever their idea is, whether that's pure design in Apple or whether that's getting us to Mars. It's a reality distortion field. Whether that's a good or bad thing, because again, charisma can be has a dark side.
Yeah.
Get away. Teams led by resonant leaders are 20% more productive than those led by dissonant leaders. As emotional resonance creates a culture of trust and collaboration.
That makes sense.
Employees with emotionally intelligent leaders outperform their peers by 20 or 30%.
Wow. Again, emotional intelligence.
Emotional, yeah.
Not intelligence.
Emotional intelligence. It's not somebody who is aware of these things, right? Even the simple things like a leader being able to know how to deliver criticism properly to somebody in a way where that person doesn't shut down.
Yeah.
Because you need to give them the criticism to help them improve their performance. But you have to find ways of being able to help them improve without having them feel threatened or kind of destroyed. So again, they're managing things on this underlayer.
Yeah.
This hidden force. And again, that's why, we often consider leaders charismatic.
Yeah.
58% of workplace performance was attributed to emotional intelligence because leaders help manage stress and inspire the team, leading to better organizational outcomes.
Dang. Again, it's those facts are so wild because, like for me, I'm a coder, so that's my background, right? So for me, progress or gaining skill for me was literally just become a better coder and just coding more, or like learning a language, reading books, right? But I had never really thought about the importance of the emotional aspect of how powerful that is, right?
It's huge, right? Because it sets the mood. And again, it's the difference between doing a task and feeling motivated about it and doing a task and not feeling motivated about it, and how much you could potentially be sabotaging yourself.
Yeah.
And so Organizations with leaders who exhibit high emotional intelligence are 2.5 times more likely to have high-performing teams. A study in Harvard Business Review found that employees with resonant leaders reported 40% lower levels of stress. Companies with emotionally intelligent leaders are 37% more likely to report higher profitability. Wow. It's because all up and down the chain of command, one of the most important things the leader is doing is he's setting the mood. He or she are setting the mood. They're establishing the culture, because nobody can control things top down and know every little thing that's happening. One of my favorite things from I once read General Mattis's book. He was our Secretary of Defense for a while, General Mad Dog Mattis, and he's an icon in the Marine Corps. And he talks about how culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is the idea. Yeah, you can have strategy, but the most important thing is to imbue every single person, in this case in the Marine Corps, with the proper culture. In terms of you see something wrong,
Wow.
you go fix it. You don't just leave things be, because otherwise things start falling through the cracks. Everyone takes personal responsibility for every aspect up and down the chain of command.
Wow.
Right? And that is the thing that makes organizations do better, because you need to have decentralized command. People need to be able to kind of know the direction we're heading and be able to make decisions moment to moment based on what they're seeing. Because no leader can at any moment in time be able to micromanage and actually know what's going on.
Wow.
So teaching people to think and make decisions on their own and have the confidence to do so is probably the reason why these metrics are happening.
Yeah, and again, you think of a lot of these tech startups, right? Or a lot of these progressive companies, the corporate culture is so important to so many people. But you have to instill that culture. And, I guess that has to be a primary focus for a lot of these successful companies, especially if you know these stats, right?
Yeah.
If you understand the importance of the emotional aspect of culture and leadership, and how powerful this is to make yourselves profitable. Just the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
Just make your company more profitable. You should really be focusing on this a lot.
To keep people engaged, to keep people heading towards a
absolutely.
direction.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us just forget about that, because we're just thinking about, let's just do the work, right? But we're not thinking about how do we get people motivated to do the work.
Yeah.
And that's probably just as important as doing the work.
Oftentimes, because if people don't even show up to do the work,
Just showing up.
Well, I mean, in terms of actually trying.
Yeah.
Sometimes people, you have days where you just you don't feel good, and you just clock it in, so you don't have the right energy. But this is what kind of these leaders are able to do. One of the big things they're meant to do that works well is that leaders set a vision, not just a goal, right? So if a vision is a compass direction that people are heading in, while a goal is like a GPS coordinate, a particular spot, right?
Yeah.
Goals can change. In a chaotic environment, goals can change. But having a compass direction of this is what we think is actually valuable and what we think is worth fighting for, that's the vision. That's the compass direction.
Yeah. I never thought of it that way.
But
That's such a good way to put it.
And you can fail at achieving goals, but you can always be striving, with the vision to be, better at whatever the thing it is. To be a better friend, to be a better parent, to be a better coworker. You could fail at individual goals, but the vision, the compass direction that everybody's heading in, that's one of the things that resonant leaders are setting.
No, 100%. If a goal could be we need to make $1 million in sales this year.
Yeah.
But that's just a goal. But the direction of the company could be we need to be the best, customer service company out there, right?
Yeah.
Or something. We need to offer the most value.
Or anytime somebody opens one of our products, they must have a smile on their face.
See, that's such a great direction, right?
Right.
But it's so simple, and it's literally one sentence or phrase.
Yeah.
But it encapsulates
products
a
should bring
direction.
joy.
Yeah, products should do this. It's so simple, but it's so true. Yeah.
So that again, the emotional contagion and I guess the cultural contagion of the resonant leader is what like swings profit lines up 20% just by doing that. One of the things that in the book Resonant Leadership by Richard Boyakis, who is one of the kind of big researchers in this field, they talk a lot about the internal state management of leaders, where leaders oftentimes get themselves into a self-sacrifice cycle, where when you're a leader, that you have big responsibilities on your shoulders, and then they run themselves into the ground. And when they run themselves into the ground, they go from being resonant leaders to being dissonant leaders, because all of a sudden the darkness and the toxicity that builds in their life starts to be the new contagion.
So is dissonance the opposite of resonance?
Yeah, dissonance is the opposite of...
So they basically cancel out any sort of like good vibes.
So dissonance is something that's out of tune.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, it has the reverse effect. So a big aspect of resonant leadership is actually for leaders to take care of themselves and find ways of rejuvenating themselves and not running themselves into the ground, because then whatever is going wrong in their life all of a sudden starts to leak into the organization. They need to like be able to find adequate time to rest, have things built into the life to like de-stress, to find center. To, I don't know. They talk a lot about like finding like mindfulness practices, like meditation, yoga, so something, taking a walk, because again, whenever you're walking through the world, you might not even be aware of it, but you're walking around with some form of emotional contagion.
Yeah,
and it'd be good to have positive emotional contagion in the world, as opposed to walking around with a dark cloud that's seeping and then infecting everybody else and bringing everyone else down. That's very anti-charismatic.
Yeah, and like a lot of people use the word, "Oh, he has good energy. She has good energy." I think that's what a lot of people kind of refer that as. Like, they're just, like I really like that guy. But again, we carry this kind of energy.
Yeah.
Right?
So for whether you're somebody's going to be on a stage performing on video or something, or somebody's just going through the day of leading a team, finding ways of, again, controlling your internal state and getting into a place where whatever your emotional contagion is, whatever you're kind of spreading, is something that's benefiting people. And that's a big part of basically taking the stage. It's kind of stage charisma.
Got it.
So the last section of our conversation is getting personal.
Yes, the personal charisma.
So I conquered stage fright.
Yeah.
By kind of hitting my head against the wall with it for a few years.
So you're comfortable on stage.
Yeah. But still like one-on-one is rough. And again, like feeling comfortable is a very big part of charisma, right? Because again, it's a form of emotional contagion. So at some point in time, after I graduated college, me and my good friend went on this odyssey where he was working in Hollywood as an editor, and basically he had a free parking spot for me there every night of the week.
Oh, nice.
And we went out almost every night of 2014 into the Hollywood nightclub scene. And we did the whole like pickup artist thing.
Wow.
And again, it's the same stubborn thing, just hitting your head against the walls.
It's like Night at the Roxbury. I'm just bashing your jeans.
Right. So a big part of developing charisma, right, is getting the reps in, right? So people who are very charismatic in some way, some form in life, had the opportunity to get a lot of practice in. And so it's important that if you're trying to work on this thing, is you create some sort of laboratory for yourself to get a lot of practice in.
Yeah.
Of one-on-one charisma, whether that's like going to like business meetups every week, whether that's doing an open mic like I did for the stage fright thing and getting better on being stage, whether that's learning cold approach pickup, whether that's getting a job as a salesperson or whatever it is, putting yourself into environments where and having a kind of a mission where you get those reps in. Because by the time you have 500 conversations with people, again, it's weird. There's a switch that flips. And all of a sudden, you can't even imagine what it was like before when you were completely frozen and stuck.
Right.
And so you have to find ways of like kind of playing games. So for example, me and my friend, we had this game where we would tag ourselves in. So we couldn't decide who we would have to go talk to. But if somebody tags you in, you have to go. And so whatever it did enough of the psychological pressure to get over the psychological pressure of not going to talk to people.
Because you had to do it.
Because you had
no
to do
choice.
it.
Yeah.
It's like a dare, right?
Yeah.
And that game worked for us. But finding some sort of thing, a game that gets you to get over that hurdle and then get those social reps in that form.
Yeah, yeah.
Because again, to become really good over time, you just need to have a lot of interactions with people. And a big part of personal charisma is this idea of creating a bubble. So in the Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox-Cabane, her formula was power and warmth and then presence. I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. Because, the other studies we were looking at was influence and affability.
Yeah, yeah. What does that mean, presence?
Well, presence is being in the moment with people. And because we're so sensitive to even the smallest micro expressions in people's faces, we can read micro expressions in people's faces that are like as fast as 17 milliseconds. People are very much in tune with whether you're fully there with them or not, and whether you're like fully listening to them and experiencing them.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton was very famous for supposedly when you spoke to him, you felt like you're the only person in the room.
Okay.
So a big part of personal charisma, the stage charisma, it's like emanating all this energy. But a big part of personal charisma is making a person feel heard, and at least in that moment, making them feel worthy and unique and understood.
Do you have any examples of like I know it sounds kind of like a silly question, right? But are there any examples of like how to be more present or like?
Well, so you could obviously read some books on mindfulness and that kind of thing, but even the simple question of "Am I present?" has this weird effect that the asking of the question automatically throws you into the present moment.
Got it.
Right. Learning to like focus your eyes, remember we talked about the Clint Eastwood squint?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe tapping in a little bit into the Duchenne smile, the genuine smile with the crow's feet, and learning to kind of try to block out everything else and fully just pay attention to a person.
Yeah.
I have a very hard time with this in terms of my brain is always working on like, what is the next thing to say?
Yeah.
But if you're truly creating a bubble with somebody, you're actually listening to them.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're not waiting to say the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're letting them express themselves.
Right.
And a lot of times people are lacking that in life. Somebody truly paying attention to them and like really tuning in with them and listening to them. And personal charisma is about creating that feeling of that instant connection. One of the ways that it's working is the loss of time, right? So when people are like suffering, right, one of the interesting things is that our brains slice time faster and faster, faster. So like if there's an emergency situation, the reason people say it's time slows down is your brain is literally starting to fire faster and slicing time.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So when you're when you're waiting for the day to be over, and you're looking at the clock, and it's like, oh, why is it so slow?
Yeah.
It's because you're kind of in the suffering state, and your brain is actually slicing time faster. Right.
It's counterintuitive, but it's funny.
But when people are in tune with each other, you enter like sometimes what people call flow state. Where time is lost, and it's just a vibe. And so that is when personal charisma is working. When people are losing the sense of time around you, and potentially you're losing your sense of time with them because you're going through this like communion. creating that bubble, that's the thing that a lot of times when you hear about people who are highly charismatic in a personal setting, that's what they're able to do. They make you feel heard, and they make you feel like you're the only person that matters, and there's no world outside of the bubble that you're in.
Now that you kind of phrase it that way, I'm sure we've all had conversations where we've been in some sort of like flow, right? And I think what you're saying is that when you're conversing someone and you're just going back and forth, right? And time flies. It really does. Like we've all experienced it. If we get along with somebody, right? We could just literally talk to them. Oftentimes, maybe in like the parking lot, like after dinner, right? Sometimes, I find myself just talking to somebody in the parking lot. Hey, let's do this, let's do that. Hey, let's talk about this, and next thing you know, it's like you're talking in a parking lot longer than actually at the dinner, right?
Yeah,
because time just flies, and you're flowing with that person. But that's charisma. That's personal charisma, and I think it's one of those things where it's different, right, than stage charisma, as you're saying, but we all know what that's like.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you have that with your friends.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I guess what makes somebody personally charismatic is their ability to create that feeling consistently.
Well, that's the hard
with the
part.
different people they're running into.
Right, that's the hard part. Doing that with friends is easy.
Yeah.
Right? I could talk to my friends, for hours, but doing that with a stranger that you just met, that's the hard part.
It is. One thing that I found as a useful way of thinking about it, Charlie Houpert, the guy who does the Charisma on Command YouTube channel, he has this idea that charisma is a way of being, and you should flirt with everybody.
Wow.
Is that every single person you're going through life is like, you can't have it, be trying to turn it on for one person, but not have it turned on for everybody else. It's, you should be charming and flirty and fun with the bank teller, the person working at the gas station, the old ladies trying to cross the street, everybody. It should always be on.
That sounds so exhausting for every introvert out there, though.
It is, and again, then you potentially need, if you're an introvert, a big part of it is that you can enjoy social situations, but afterwards you need time to recover. Like I need, even after this, I'm gonna have to go veg out for a while, because you can have great social interactions, but then introversion, a big part of it is that you need recovery time.
Like recharge your batteries.
Batteries afterwards. Yeah. And so you flirt with everybody, and when you have interactions with people, you act as if you already are best friends. You assume friendship. That's what cocky funny kind of does automatically. Is that if you're being ridiculous and silly and kind of making jokes with people immediately right off the bat, they sense like, oh, this is exactly what it feels like to be around friends.
Yeah, your friend.
And so you're kind of in this place. The other thing that's also sort of gets you straight into that sense of instant connection is that conversations between friends are more statement heavy than question heavy.
Okay.
When people go into an interview, right, you're asked questions and you have to answer questions like, what's your favorite color? And like, oh, what'd you think about that? Whatever it is.
Right.
Friends, the way they talk about it, like, that movie Megalopolis I saw last week, man, that movie is so crazy, right? They make statements. And then friends respond like, yeah, but it wasn't as bad as that other movie.
Yeah. We're not asking questions. Questions are kind of threatening, right?
It feels like an interview.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You can ask questions, but a lot of times when people are vibing and they're friends, right? You feel comfortable just expressing whatever random idea comes into your head.
Right.
And you just make statements, and then they make statements back. And that's what builds the conversation, is just the act of expressing whatever you think. Of whatever the random little thing it is.
Right. And you're not worried about being judged. You're comfortable.
Yeah.
And when you're comfortable, you can say stuff, right, that you aren't afraid of saying, like how bad a certain movie is. You're just saying things. And so it's always a really good practice to
potentially learn to take really boring subjects,
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know, like paint drying, and find ways of talking about them in a very fascinating way.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it was like every ripple of the wall form. You know, because then you get comfortable with just talking about anything on the top of your mind.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you can talk about things off the top of your mind, whatever it comes up with, and you can talk about it in a way that's interesting and fun,
Mm-hmm.
and truly sharing like what your kind of opinions on, that's what makes it feel like you're friends, even though potentially you met this person 30 seconds ago.
Yeah, that's really cool. So that personal charisma, you know, again, you can kind of be funny, right?
Mhm.
That kind of cocky funny, right? Because then that's like you're letting your guard down and you're just talking to your buddy. You know, it's such a simple formula. Like it's like every time I watch, for example, someone on YouTube or a streamer, and I look at wonder how they became so successful and have so many millions of followers. I see that formula almost like I would say like 90% of the time. They're cocky, but they're also really funny. Like they'll
Yeah.
say really controversial things, things that, you know, most people wouldn't want to say, but they put themselves out there and they're not afraid to being misunderstood.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where the cockiness comes from. But then they're also hilarious because, again, back to we were talking about before, like comedy, right, is a vehicle to deliver the truth. Right.
Yeah.
And we don't laugh out loud. We laugh within.
Yeah, we
Because-
laugh things. We don't laugh things off.
Yeah,
we
we
laugh,
don't-
laugh
there you
things
go.
in. Yes.
Yeah, we laugh things in because it's the truth.
Yeah,
And sometimes we find the truth hilarious.
exactly. And again, if you can pull off saying like you're completely obsessed with me, aren't you? And they're laughing. They've
Yeah,
just
I'm
laughed.
laughing.
They've just laughed that in.
Yeah.
Right. That's the idea that
Yeah.
you made like this kind of edgy statement.
Yeah.
But if they've laughed at it, they've somehow unconsciously accepted it.
Jane, how did you become so charismatic?
Practice, baby, practice. Anyway, so
Hilarious. Practice, baby.
no, but really, at the end of the day, we're talking about the chords, you know, the broad brush strokes, and that'll get you started. But at some point in time, you do need to get practice in.
So
A lot of practice in.
Would you say that's like kind of the number one advice you would give to somebody who would want to develop charisma?
I think so, because again, the people I think who've naturally developed charisma, right, in some form or other, they've gotten a lot of practice in. It's at some point in their life,
Yeah.
you know, and they've just worked on it, and they've made a lot of mistakes, and they might be very attuned to every little thing they did and be very good at calibrating, slowly realizing, oh, that worked.
Yeah.
Oh, that didn't work.
Yeah.
You know, again, that tends to come up. If a conversation is going really well with people, one way to tell is if they're telling a story. If you can get people to be telling you a story, right, as opposed to like one-word answers, like, hey, you know, what did you do this weekend? Oh, I don't know what to say. That means it's working.
Oh, okay.
And similar to what we talked about in the episode on hypnosis, right? If you can build a world with people, mental time travel, in terms of like, oh, you know, I just like, let's go get like, go rent a car and drive to Vegas right now. How crazy would that be? You know, would be, you know, just raining down money all over,
Yeah.
all over the town.
Language.
The descriptive language,
Yeah.
creating that world. And again, it's role play. So if you're acting as if you are already, you know, best friends, then eventually, basically, you know, people don't really even realize the transition. Like, I only met this person 2 minutes ago, but 10 minutes later, like they already feel like they've known you for such a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
Because through descriptive language and like mental time travel and building a story arc and a journey, you're able to create that sense of they've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
And again, personal charisma is all about that instant connection.
Wow.
Okay, I know you've been waiting for this.
Okay.
FBI hostage negotiation. And this will be the last bit.
Sure.
Because this has been going a bit. All right. So nothing gets more intimate, I think, than, FBI hostage negotiation. It's such an intense thing. Again, they have to be dealing with whatever the hostage taker is and trying to influence them in a way to get them to essentially do the right thing. One of the big aspects that happened when Chris Voss, the writer of Never Split the Difference, was a negotiator is that there was a big shift before Ruby Ridge, Waco, and some of those things that happened in the early 90s in the doctrine of the FBI hostage negotiators, where previously it was much more logical, and then they realized like logic isn't working, and you can't logic somebody, out of the situation.
Yeah.
And so they started looking more at these questions of like, okay, what methodologies do we use to connect with the hostage taker and be able to influence them with irrational influence. So a form of charisma. Chris Voss often talks about this concept of tactical empathy. And again, this idea of making somebody feel heard
Oh, wow.
and like kind of understood,
Yeah.
even though you might not really, well, you're creating the illusion that they're being heard through certain verbal patterns that the FBI has developed.
Wow, that's so funny because again, like I see this in movies. I don't know what an actual hostage situation is like or negotiation is like.
Yeah.
But you see a lot in a lot of TV shows and movies. The cop or the negotiator is like saying, "Hey, are you hungry? Do you want to?
Yeah.
Like, how are you feeling right now?" It's always like the empathy. You want a slice of pizza? We can get you a pizza right now. Like, I know you've been in there for 9 hours. You must be tired and thirsty. Like things like that. Just
Exactly.
kind of break down the barriers. But the empathy is a way to get in there.
Because they're working on this again, this deeper layer. Obviously, there's the surface level negotiation of again trying to figure out the logistics of the thing, but it's the underlayer that is really shifting things. You can't logic people. Logic gets people to think. Emotion gets them to act. In the book, there's a lot of major revelations in it, but a few of the techniques that I think people can take from it and understand, like kind of how this applies. So, again, you're using kind of tactile empathy to kind of get into people's minds. I think that you're using the word tactical because it's a cold empathy. Right? You don't want to feel compassion for a hostage taker,
yeah.
but you need to know how they think.
Yeah.
Right. Voice is incredibly important because most of these things are happening on a phone call. And Chris Voss talks about, first of all, he has an incredible voice if you ever watched any of his podcasts.
Okay.
But he talks about two types of voices that he often has to come to play with. The default voice is the playful voice.
Wow.
And that's the voice that you just kind of go through like kind of life with most of the time.
Yeah.
And again, it's expressiveness. It's the
right.
idea of like, oh, warmth, fun.
Hi.
Enjoy, right?
Yeah.
But in a hostage situation, he shifts to something he calls the radio DJ voice.
Gosh.
And the
That's
core
amazing.
aspect of the radio DJ voice is that it's slow, it's calm, and the tonality always ends down.
Oh.
So it's calm authority. So because you don't want to get things too crazy, but essentially you're using the voice to lull the hostage taker. And so when tonality goes up, it's like when tonality goes up, the Valley Girl accent has that problem. Like
Is that why it's so annoying?
a little bit, right? Because everything sounds like a question.
Yeah.
And when tonality goes up in a vocal inflection, it's a little bit of a thing of psychological, I don't want to say submission, but like you're basically kind of like, is that okay?
Yeah.
You kind of,
Or is that okay?
exactly.
Down.
Right. So that by going down,
Yeah.
it creates this finality and this authority. So that's the radio DJ voice. Wow. So the whole thing is like hostage negotiations take a long time and they go slow. And essentially, the longer this hostage negotiation goes, actually, the easier it is to close.
Really?
Yeah, because people slowly kind of get worn out.
Okay.
Then
Makes sense.
in terms of the actual verbal techniques, one of the biggest things they do is this concept of verbal mirroring, where anytime somebody says something, you say what they said back to them, like the last 3 words.
The last 3 words?
Yes, but you say it radio DJ voice.
Oh, you mean the last 3 words?
Silence. It gets the person, it makes the person feel heard,
Yeah.
and they keep talking. And it gets them
Interesting.
on a roll to start oversharing.
So it's like you're being present, right?
You're
That's
being
that-
present. Yeah,
right.
you're applying
Yeah.
Olivia Fox-Cabain's concept of presence.
Got it.
And you're creating this bubble where the person feels heard.
Wow.
And you're creating that kind of illusion by mirroring the things they're saying back to them,
Interesting.
right? And they even did this weird study where like they found that when waiters do this, as opposed to like waiters like being super bubbly or whatever, when waiters just mirror what people are saying back at them, they get higher tips. For some reason, I don't know, it makes being felt heard, I guess,
Yeah.
touches something in our brains.
That's a total life hack for you waiters out there. Just repeat like, "Hey, would you like? What would you like? 2 hot dogs? 2 hot dogs?
2 hot dogs.
1 soda? 1 soda?" Like,
Yes.
just repeating it.
Yes.
Interesting. That's so cool.
It
You'll
make-
get higher tips.
It makes people feel heard,
So crazy.
right?
I love it.
Then he has this great idea called the accusation audit, which is before you go into any negotiation, you write down every single insult or complaint they have about you, and then you use it before they do. Listen, you're really going to think I'm a jerk, but I really would like
Interesting.
to switch my seat.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
for whatever reason, taking the accusation on yourself and saying it first allows people like, oh, okay, yeah, well, yeah.
Like
no, you're not a
it's-
jerk.
Yeah, he understands me.
It
he knows where I'm
it
coming
disarms.
from.
It disarms. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
you're really gonna hate me, but
Yeah.
I really need help with this
Right.
problem.
Right. I mean,
Right.
and we do that all the time, but I never understood why we did that.
You know,
Right.
for sure, you think we're an evil corporation, but we really need to close this court case,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you take whatever the arrows they have, and
Yeah.
you actually disarm them by using them first.
Interesting.
This idea of labeling is very, very powerful. A lot of times when people are having conversations, they're not looking for you to solve their problem, right? Again, they're looking just to be heard. And so being an emotional psychic, using phrases like, it seems like you're really worried right now. The power of labeling, what it does, labeling diffuses negative emotions. So when somebody tells you, like, it seems like you're very stressed right now, it does something in people where it diffuses the negative emotion in them. Because again, it gets acknowledged.
Yeah.
It's like when people are angry and express the anger to somebody, afterwards they're like, oh, I don't feel angry anymore. So labeling has this ability, like, it seems like you're very sad right now. Right? You're being kind of an emotional psychic. Even if you're wrong, it's kind of doing this thing. A person feels witnessed, and they feel heard. And so labeling diffuses negatives, and then labeling also reinforces positives.
Okay. Can you give me an example?
It seems like you're very happy about this deal.
Oh, got it.
Right? So
Got it.
it strengthens the positive, but it diffuses the negative.
Got it.
And so research shows that the best way to deal with negativity is to observe it without reaction and without judgment. And it diffuses the emotion. So the act of labeling people's reactions and the emotion, like basically giving it attention, witnessing it, and letting people know that you've witnessed the thing is enough to diffuse the emotional charge in them and then keep the hostage taker calm.
Yeah. No, I feel like this applies to so many different fields besides hostage. I mean, hostage negotiation is like a really extreme.
It's
version of
extreme
it.
version.
But
Yeah.
like, say you're a therapist, right? You know, and just literally just listening, being present, and just mirroring what they're saying.
Yeah.
It's such an
And-
effective way. Yeah.
and essentially, the ultimate goal of whether you're doing it right or not is that it's getting the person to say, "That's right."
Ooh.
And he talks about it's not yes. It's actually better to get people to say no.
Really?
And we're not going to go into that, but like, read the book. It's great. Because no gets you to actual objections that you can fix. People say yes for a million different reasons, and yeses don't mean. People just say yes all the
I
time. But if somebody
see.
says no, you now have something you actually work on.
Wow.
But getting a person to say that's right, which means everything you did up to this point, the labeling, the verbal mirroring, the accusation audit, it means the person feels heard,
Acknowledged. Right.
And they found when they switched to this sort of doctrine and the FBI, when they're doing hostage negotiation things, they were getting better outcomes. Even though the negotiation of the logistics themselves didn't really change much, but having the hostage taker feel heard, I guess developed this connection, this bubble with the hostage negotiator, and allowed them to, again, get a better outcome. And so
That's wild.
that's why personal charisma, I think, in a lot of ways, is a lot more intricate, because again, it's a two-way street. It's more of it's a duet. You have to create this bubble. You have to kind of make the world melt away and make the person feel like they're the only person in the world with you at that moment in time. And that's when personal charisma is fully functioning.
Well, but you're also saying that there's very simple ways to do it, right? And again, you don't necessarily have to be the most charismatic person,
Yeah.
but just simply being present. Number one, just acknowledging what people are saying,
Yeah.
and just to basically almost just make them feel comfortable, right?
Yeah.
By these very simple techniques.
That's
very
right.
effective, and we can all learn this.
So you might not end up becoming Eddie Van Halen on the guitar,
Yeah.
but I think you can learn how to play Smells Like Teen Spirit or Wonderwall.
Just play those simple chords.
Right, like the broad brushstrokes, just becoming, learning to listen to the music, being aware that, there's this entire hidden layer of communication
Yeah.
that's happening. Being able to play those basic chords of the fact that apparently, for whatever reason, people react to
Yeah.
some recipe of power and warmth.
That's hilarious because I feel like a lot of musicians, they would get pretty mad if Green Day comes out with a hit and they only use 3 power chords.
Yeah.
And they come up with a riff and then just a song and they sell millions and millions of albums or
Yeah.
singles. And then you have this poor musician who's been studying his whole life, how to play classical guitar, and he's just looking at this guy. This guy just played 3 chords
Yeah.
and just won over an entire following. What am I doing wrong?
What am I doing wrong? You're basically describing a person who feels like they're not charismatic, looking
Right.
at a charismatic person and not
Exactly.
understanding. It's like that famous phrase: "An advanced enough technology is indistinguishable from magic."
Yeah.
Right? Is that so? You witness this thing and you don't understand it, but it seems like some mysterious magic.
Yeah.
And hopefully, again, talking about these concepts, like, again, taking the stage in emotional contagion, and again, the creating of the bubble that is personal charisma,
Yeah.
becoming aware of it will help demystify that magic. And
Yeah, that was Arthur C. Clarke. Guy who wrote 2001: Space
Oh, yeah?
Odyssey. Yeah,
Okay.
he's the one who made that phrase
That's
or that quote. I love that guy.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, I think that concludes our podcast.
yes, yes,
I love how you broke it down. Again, you simplified, and distilled a lot of information I think in just 2 hours. But I've again learned so much just from this episode. So I just want to thank you, Gene, for taking the time, and
thank you.
and our listeners for sticking around.
Oh God, we made it to the end.
You can find us and listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out our YouTube channel if you haven't already. We're posting a bunch of cool videos out there for you to check out, and we're really proud of them because I think we're kind of tapping into, what our listeners like enjoy actually watching and listening to, and so it's really rewarding for us to kind of see us and our podcast grow, and I love just listening and learning to everything that you have to share, Gene. So thank you again.
Thank you, Darren.
All right.
Thanks.
So thank you for listening to Manipulation Games Psychology and Marketing Podcast. I'm Darren with Gene. Until next time, bye.